There is a feeling that most of us know but rarely say out loud. It is the sensation of waking up on a perfectly ordinary morning and being gripped, somewhere deep in the chest, by the quiet conviction that something is wrong. Not wrong in a way we can name, not wrong in a way anyone has explained to us, just wrong. And from that moment, the rest of the day becomes an exercise in trying to fix it. We check our phones, we scan our inboxes, we rehearse conversations we haven't had yet. We scroll through feeds looking for confirmation that we are okay, that we are not falling behind, that we have not committed some invisible offense against the algorithm, the culture, the unspoken rules of a game no one ever sat us down to learn. We do this every single day. We do it until we are hollowed out. And the worst part, the truly devastating part, is that we never actually find what is wrong. We just keep running. In 1914, a man who understood this horror more intimately than perhaps anyone in literary history sat down and began writing a novel about a bank clerk named Joseph K., who wakes up one morning in his boarding house room and is told, calmly and without elaboration, that he is under arrest. No one tells him the charge. No one tells him the law he has broken. No one even removes him from his daily life. He is simply informed that a case has been opened against him, that proceedings are underway, and that the vast, invisible machinery of some unnamed court has turned its eye in his direction. The man who wrote this was Franz Kafka, and the novel was The Trial. It was never finished. And what it has to say about the way we are living right now, over a century later, is so precise, so surgically accurate, that it should make us sit very still and ask ourselves a question we have been avoiding for a very long time. Before we descend into Joseph K.'s nightmare, we need to sit for a moment with the man who dreamed it into existence. Kafka lived most of his adult life under a shadow he could never quite name. He worked as an insurance clerk in Prague, a job he found soul-deadening but could not bring himself to leave. He wrote obsessively, often through the night, producing some of the most psychologically penetrating fiction ever conceived. Yet he published almost nothing during his lifetime and considered the vast majority of his work to be failures. He was racked by an invisible guilt that had no clear origin. He felt perpetually inadequate in the eyes of his domineering father. He entered into engagements he could not sustain and broke them off with anguished letters. He was, in every measurable way, a man trapped inside a system of expectation and judgment that he could neither satisfy nor escape, and then he died. He died of tuberculosis in 1924, at the age of 40, in relative obscurity. And before he died, he left explicit instructions to his closest friend, Max Brod: burn everything. Burn the unfinished novels, burn the notebooks, burn the trial, burn the castle, burn all of it. Let none of it survive me. Brod looked at these instructions. He understood them, and he defied them completely. He published everything. He gave the world Kafka. And here is where the story stops being a charming literary anecdote and becomes something far more unsettling. Because Kafka's final wish, the one clear, unambiguous act of control he tried to exert over his own legacy, his own narrative, his own closure, was overruled. The world decided what Franz Kafka meant. The world decided what would happen to his words. And Kafka, the man who spent his entire creative life writing about the absolute impossibility of controlling your own story, became the ultimate proof of his own thesis. He had no say. He never would. The court of posterity rendered its judgment without consulting the accused. If that does not send a chill through you, you have not yet understood what this book is really about. Now let us enter the maze. Joseph K. is arrested, but the arrest is unlike anything we recognize. No handcuffs, no jail cell, no Miranda rights. The warders who appear in his room are eating his breakfast. The inspector who informs him of the proceedings does so from a neighbor's bedroom. There is a surreal, almost absurd politeness to the whole affair. K is told he can go to work. He can continue his life. The arrest, it seems, is merely a fact that now exists in the background of his reality, like a diagnosis you cannot verify or a rumor you cannot trace. And what does K do? He does exactly what we would do. He fights. He demands information. He seeks out the court. He shows up to hearings in cramped, suffocating attic rooms above tenement buildings, rooms filled with faceless spectators and judges who seem to have no interest in the substance of his case. He gives impassioned speeches defending himself against charges no one has articulated. He hires an advocate, a man named Hold, who is perpetually bedridden, surrounded by candles and the stale air of inertia, and who speaks endlessly about the complexity of the legal system while accomplishing precisely nothing. K meets a painter named Titorelli who claims to have influence with the judges and offers him 3 possible outcomes, none of which include actual acquittal. The best K can hope for, Titorelli explains with chilling casualness, is indefinite postponement, a state in which the case is never resolved but merely suspended, hovering above his head like a permanent cloud. And K keeps going, he keeps seeking, he keeps believing that if he can just find the right person, file the right petition, say the right thing, the machinery will recognize his innocence and release him. This is not a legal drama. This is a portrait of every one of us refreshing our email at 2 in the morning, convinced that the answer is coming. It is the delusion that if we just work harder, network smarter, optimize more ruthlessly, the invisible system that seems to be judging us will finally render a favorable verdict. Kafka understood something that the modern self-help industry still refuses to admit. The system is not broken. The system is functioning exactly as designed. It was never built to give us answers. It was built to keep us seeking them. There is a moment near the end of the novel that contains, in my view, one of the most important parables ever written. K encounters a priest in a dim, cavernous cathedral, and the priest tells him a story. It is called Before the Law. A man comes from the country to seek admittance to the law. Before the entrance stands a doorkeeper who tells him he cannot enter right now, but perhaps later. The man waits. He waits for days. He waits for years. He bribes the doorkeeper. He studies the doorkeeper's face, his fleas, the fur collar of his coat. He grows old sitting on a stool beside the door. And finally, as he is dying, he summons the last of his strength and asks one question. If everyone strives to reach the law, how is it that in all these years, no one else has ever come to this door? The doorkeeper leans down and shouts into the dying man's ear. No one else could ever have been admitted here, because this door was intended only for you, and now I am going to close it. Read that again. Sit with it, because what Kafka has done here is describe the architecture of a trap so perfect that it uses our own identity against us. The door was ours. The invitation was real. The possibility of entry was genuine. And we spent our entire life waiting, performing deference, playing by rules we assumed existed, never once considering that the act of waiting was itself the sentence. We were not locked out. We locked ourselves in, right there on that stool, paralyzed by the belief that permission was coming. How many of us are sitting outside our own doors right now? How many of us are waiting for someone, some institution, some algorithm, some parent, some partner, some invisible authority to finally lean down and say, yes, you are enough. You may enter. You are cleared of all charges. And how many of us will die on that stool? The ending of the trial is one of the most devastating passages in all of literature. And it is devastating precisely because of what it refuses to give us. On the eve of K's 31st birthday, 2 men arrive at his apartment. They are dressed in formal attire. They are polite. They link their arms through his, and they walk him through the streets of the city like old friends on an evening stroll. K knows, with a strange clarity, what is happening. He resists briefly, then stops. They take him to a quarry on the outskirts of town. They lay him down. They pass a butcher's knife back and forth over his body in a grotesque parody of courtesy, each gesturing for the other to perform the act. And K, lying there, looking up, sees a window in a distant building flicker open. A figure leans out, someone is watching, and K has one final thought. He wonders if there was an argument he never made, a judge he never reached, a piece of logic that could have saved him. Even now, even in the final seconds, his mind is still searching, still trying to solve it. The knife enters his heart, and his last words, the final utterance of a man who spent the entire novel trying to defend himself against an unnamed accusation in a system that was never going to listen, are these, like a dog. He said it as though the shame of it would outlive him. There is no verdict. There is no explanation. There is no closure. There is nothing. Just a man, a knife, a quarry, and the unbearable weight of a question that was never going to be answered. And this is where most analyses stop. They call it bleak. They call it absurdist. They file it under existential dread and move on. But I think they are missing the real horror. The real horror is not that Kay dies. The real horror is not even that he dies without knowing his crime. The real horror is that he dies still trying to figure it out. His final conscious act is not acceptance, it is not peace, it is not even rage, it is problem solving. He is optimizing in the quarry. He is iterating on his defense strategy with a knife in his chest. And if that does not describe the way we are living, I do not know what does. We are a civilization of people who cannot stop optimizing. We optimize our sleep, we optimize our grief, we optimize our rest, until rest becomes another form of productivity. We treat every emotional crisis as a systems failure that can be debugged with the right framework, the right therapist, the right morning routine, the right podcast, and we never, not once, stop to consider the possibility that the crisis is not a bug. It is the system. The system is the crisis, and our frantic efforts to fix it are not bringing us closer to freedom. They are the walls of the maze itself. This is the philosophical fracture that Kafka exposes with surgical, almost cruel precision. Our obsession with closure is not a path to peace. It is a form of self-destruction. Every time we demand that the universe explain itself, every time we insist that our suffering must have a reason, every time we burn ourselves alive trying to prove our worth to an institution, a relationship, or a culture that has never once clearly stated what it wants from us, we are Joseph K. We are standing in suffocating attic rooms, giving speeches to judges who are not listening. We are hiring advocates who will accomplish nothing. We are studying the doorkeeper's fleas while the door that was always ours remains untouched. And the thing that is killing us, the thing that drains the color from our days and the meaning from our efforts, is not the accusation. It is our inability to stop defending ourselves against it. We have made a religion out of resolution. We have been taught that maturity means processing everything, understanding everything, closing every loop, but some loops do not close. Some accusations have no origin. Some systems were never designed to acquit. And the bravest, most terrifying, most liberating thing a person can do is to look at the open loop, the unanswered question, the unresolved guilt, and simply set it down, not solve it. Not reframe it, not optimize around it, just set it down and walk away from the stool beside the door. I want to be clear, this is not nihilism. Kafka was not telling us that nothing matters. He was telling us that our compulsive need to make everything matter in a legible, resolved, validated way is what robs life of its actual texture. Kay's tragedy is not that the world is meaningless. Kay's tragedy is that he cannot stop demanding meaning from a world that communicates in a language he will never fully decode. And that demand, that relentless, exhausting, bone-deep demand for the universe to show its work, is what turns a life into a trial. There is a version of Joseph K. who hears the accusation and shrugs, who goes to work, kisses someone he loves, watches the light change over Prague, and lets the court do whatever the court is going to do. That K does not appear in Kafka's novel, but he lives somewhere inside the possibility space of the story, and his absence is the most important thing about the book, because that K is the one who never dies in a quarry. That K is the one who refuses to let the accusation become his identity. That K is the one who stops performing innocence for an audience that was never watching. So here is what I want to leave you with. You are not going to solve everything. You are not going to clear your name with everyone who has silently judged you. You are not going to find the perfect argument that finally makes the system say, yes, you were right all along, you may go now. Some doors will close without explanation. Some relationships will end mid-sentence. Some chapters of your life will remain unfinished, not because you failed, but because that is what unfinished looks like when it is honest. And the choice, the only choice that has ever actually been yours, is whether you spend your remaining years on the stool outside the door, studying the fleas, waiting for permission, or whether you stand up, turn around, and walk into the wider, unnamed, unresolved, gloriously unanswerable world behind you. Kafka could not save Joseph K. He could not even save his own manuscripts. But buried in the horror of this unfinished novel, in the cruelty of its ending, and the silence of its courts, there is a whispered invitation. Stop performing your trial. Stop treating your life as a case to be won. The shame does not have to outlive you. You do not have to die like a dog, begging for a verdict from an empty room. You can simply live and let the court adjourn on its own.